All right, what we're going to be doing today is looking at developing an MCP server using TypeScript. And this is the code that we're ultimately going to be developing. We're going to go over all of this where you will actually have a running MCP server at the end of all of this. So with that being said, what we're going to be using for our MCP server, we're going to be using Claude functions. And in particular, for our example, we're going to be using Firebase. Now, even though we're using Firebase, this easily transfers over to Azure or AWS Lambdas or whichever, or even containerized deployments, all the same. Again, we're just using Firebase for this. But with that being said, just for clarification, when we're talking about our LLMs reaching out to an MCP server, this is what we're looking at, right? We have whichever LLM you use, you go ahead and you connect to whatever MCP server is out there. The MCP server runs in a cloud, no problem. And here we're going to be using Firebase. I understand it's GCP, but we're using Firebase, like Amplify with AWS, same principle. And we are using Firebase functions. But all of that being said, that's just the wrapper. We are truly developing an MCP server, and that's the part that's transferable to whatever environment that you're going to ultimately be working in. Now, one thing I do want to point out is a lot of folks are looking at MCP and really trying to figure out what exactly it is underneath, what's happening, why do we have it. If you go back and look at some of the videos that I put together for LLMs and function calling, it will really give you a bit of context on the way that function calls actually happen from an LLM and some of the nuance. It's a little bit weird. And so why did MCP come along? Really, it's to kind of wrap up a lot of the function calling that used to go on. So take a look at these videos. I'll leave a link down below and put the tags at the end of the video as well. But check those out. You'll get a lot out of them, I think. But with that being said, let's jump right into the code. Now, right off the bat, we're going to have our index.ts. And if you've ever developed anything in Firebase, all you need is your imports for Firebase functions and HTTPS. There's nothing so far that's unique to MCP. And then you're going to have your entry point. And the entry point is just on request. This is where the HTTP post comes into, right? One of the things that I do put into my Firebase functions here, you can see I have this await import, and all that is, it's just a kind of a lazy loading call, and it basically says go find the function in this file, in this case jokemcpHandler.ts. And you'll notice the .js, that's because the TypeScript gets transpiled to JavaScript, and this lazy loading happens at runtime. And so this import really is for cold starts. And so that's all that is, but it has nothing to do with MCP. And then this is just the file that you're going to find it in. And then here you'll notice I have a jokemcpHandler, right? It's just a reference to a function. And here I just have that callback actually calling the request. That's it. So far, nothing spectacular, easy, standard Firebase function stuff. Now, what we're going to look at here is the jokemcpHandler.ts, and this is where everything for the MCP is actually going to start happening. The first thing that we're going to take a look at are our imports. And we'll have three specific imports that we're ultimately going to use for our MCP server. First is the MCP server from the SDK perspective, as well as the transport layer for our MCP server. Additionally, we have this Zod import, which probably has something to do with Superman's arch nemesis, but these are the three very specific imports that we need for our MCP server specifically. And in order to get those into your project, simple command, npm install, model context protocol with the SDK, and then the Zod library, right? So run this command, you'll have everything you need. What I want to talk about is the actual function that's going to be doing. This is our MCP server handler right here. But right now, it's just an async function. There's nothing going on. This is standard, Firebase function calling stuff. No big deal. Now, this is the handler. If you remember from the import in our index, this is the actual jokemcp handler. And now we are going to reach our first part of our MCP server. And we are going to have this object, which is MCP server, And you'll notice we name it MCP underscore server, and we give it a name, jokemcp. And remember this name, jokemcp, all lowercase. You're going to need it later. Now, our MCP server is going to have two tools that we register, right? So here you can see we have our MCP underscore server, and we register two tools with it, our create joke and our get joke. Now, where a lot of people get a little bit confused is they think, oh, I need two functions to handle, one to handle create joke and one to handle get joke. That's not the case. You have a single MCP server, and within that MCP server, you have whatever tools you're going to register. In this case, create joke and get joke. Here, if you have 20 of them, whatever it may be, you only have one function, and then within that function, you create your registered tools, create joke, get joke, foo joke, bar joke, whatever. Now, we will be looking at create joke first, and that just kind of allows me to shrink up all this code a little bit. But one of the things we need to do first is kind of close out exactly what everything that's happening in this jokemcpHandler function. So we're going to take our closing bracket and we're going to bring it down to the bottom. And here we're going to look at the only other code that we actually need, right? This is really the whole MCP server right here. We'll talk about create joke and get joke, but this is it. This is the whole thing. And if you'll notice, we have our streamable part for our model context protocol. And here we just set up a stream. And that's it, right? That's our transport layer. Next, all that I'm doing here is I'm looking for when the response on close happens, I'm just registering a callback, and I go ahead and close out the transport layer as well as the MCP server. Now this is, you might be thinking, well, Jeff, it's just a function call. It goes away anyways. Okay, but it's good programming practice to close out your communication. So it's just registering. When everything's closed, do a clean closeout. That's it. Now we're getting into some of the MCP server stuff. Here, you'll notice that we have our MCP underscore server and we have our connect. So the MCP server internally has, your accept socket, everything else. So that's your connection protocol there. And you'll notice we pass in the request transport. And the way that these two are working together is the MCP server knows about all the tools that are getting registered, all the properties and everything else, but the request transport layer, that actually handles the request from the LLM, right? So it takes in the request, it provides the response, the request body, everything else, right? So this is all the handshaking and everything else. And that's where these two kind of work together. And of course we have our try catch to make sure we catch our own errors, but this is it. That's pretty much the whole shindig there. That's an MCP server. So what we need to do now is really talk about the create joke and the get joke. And we're first going to be looking at create joke. So here, what we're looking at when we talk about registering a tool, we are going to look at what's required within the create joke. And then we have this async function. It's just an arrow function, and we'll take a look at that. But right now, let's go ahead and figure out what this first part of this registration tool is all about. When we look at create joke, the first thing that we're looking at just a JSON object, and it has to have a description. Here, there's the description, no big deal, right? Seen this probably 1,000,001 times. JSON object has a description. Now, the next object internal to that is the input schema. And this is what you're saying you're expecting from the LLM. And in our case, what we're expecting from the LLM is right off the bat, we want a language. And here's where that Zod library comes in. And what we are saying is language is of type string, and we're going to use a regular expression to put some boundaries on it. In our case, it's just going to be a 2-letter string, all lowercase, that's going to describe a language. So what language are you trying to create the joke in, right? Your input schema may not need language at all, right? It may need, unit of measure. It doesn't matter, but for a joke, I need language of it, right? So next, I'm going to put in a maturity level. And here, once again, we're using the Zod library, and we're saying that parameter for the input schema is a number. Incidentally, it's an int as opposed to a float or a double, whatever. and the minimum value is 2, and the maximum value is 21. And then we provide a description, and I probably should put maximum value of 18, but regardless, you get the idea, right? And so that's the next parameter for our input schema that we're expecting from the LLM. Next, we're going to put in a ranking, and it's identical to maturity, right? It's a number, it's an int, it has a minimum value of 1 to 10 for how offensive your joke is, right? And then finally, we're going to say the text, and this is the actual joke itself. And so once again, we're using the Zod library. We're saying it's a type string, but now we're saying it has a minimum length of 10 and a maximum length of 1024. And then that's the actual joke. Next, what we're actually going to do is create our arrow function. This is where the logic happens. Now, one thing to point out is that the input schema is actually what gets passed in as your args, right? So your function has access to this input schema. Here, all that I'm going to do is pretty much regurgitate back to the LLM what it gave me. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is we are going to return an array of JSON objects. In this content array, it's just an array of JSON objects. Incidentally, I only have one, but regardless, this is it, right? You can have 20 or 50 or 90 or whatever. You need to tell it a type. In this case, I'm saying, hey, I'm returning you back some text. And then I'm going to create that text. And again, I'm just regurgitating back what the LLM gave me. So here, language, right? The args, language. Same thing with maturity, giving back the maturity. And then I'm giving back the ranking and the text of the actual joke itself as well. And that's it. That's all you need for create joke. That's the whole thing. So now moving on from create joke, we're also going to obviously look at what is involved with get joke. Now, you pretty much already got this. It's pretty much the same exact thing. We have a description, then we have an inner schema, and that inner schema, again, is what we're expecting from the LLM. And in here, the LLM is requesting a joke, so tell the maturity level that you want, and then tell the ranking for the offensiveness that you want. And then, if you want, you can put in keywords if you're looking for dad jokes or puns or whatever it may be. But in here, notice we have this optional, meaning that when our MCP server is bringing that in from the LLM, the keywords may or may not be there, right? Pretty straightforward from that perspective. But again, this is where the Zod library comes in. And just as before, we have our async function. In this case, I'm just not passing in any parameters, just to show you a different picture. And then here we return, and we're going to return that array, right? That content array of JSON objects. And here we're saying, okay, the type that we're going to return is text, and the actual text is just hard-coded. Why do programmers prefer dark mode? Because light attracts bugs, right? But I didn't come up with that, but it's a pretty good joke. A lot of you may be looking at this and saying, okay, well, that's, I want to do something more than just pass back hard-coded values. In between our async and our return, it's just an arrow function. So if you want to access your database, which may be Airtable, or it could be DynamoDB, or it could be whatever, it could be Firebase real-time, doesn't matter. This is where you do it. You just do it before you return, right? So that's where all your functionality is going to go. But that's pretty much it, right? And this is where I'm saying this could be anything. This is just how you register an MCP tool. That's it. And so looking at this again, we can see that we have our three kind of MCP specific imports. We have our MCP server, which again is going to hold the socket and the connection. Then we register our tools, right? Create joke, get joke, all within a single function because we're creating a single MCP with multiple tools within it. And then we have our streamable. Now, one thing I do want to point out with this session ID generator, I have it as undefined. Now, there's two modes within MCP. You can have stateless mode and stateful mode. Because I have session ID generator as undefined, mine is stateless, which means I'm not holding any information between requests from the LLM. Just pretty much throw it away. It's kind of one and done. Now, the stateful mode, if you are going to go into stateful mode, you are going to have to start managing the session IDs, things along those lines. And you may want to look at putting this in a containerized orchestrated environment like Kubernetes or whatever environment you're using. So just keep that in mind, or you may do this, you may manage this yourself individually, but I did want to bring that up. But this is it. This is an MCP server. You're done. The whole thing. This is it. Now, what I want to do here is actually walk through connecting to our MCP server. So I've deployed mine up to Firebase. And now what we're going to do, and I'm just going to do this in Claude, but obviously it's similar in all of them. And all you need to do is you go to Customize, and then from there, you go to your connectors, and then you're going to click your Add dropdown, and then you're going to add a custom connector. Once you have that, you're going to come up with this dialog. And this dialog, you're going to put in your name or the name of the MCP server. And if you remember, ours was jokemcp, all lowercase. And then you're going to give it the URL of the MCP server. Now, just below this, you'll see the OAuth and everything else. Highly recommend you set that up. And just as an FYI, even as I was putting this video together, I left the server up for, I don't know, maybe an hour, and it got hit over 25 times. And I don't think anybody was being malicious about anything. Maybe they were, I don't know. But people are constantly looking for MCP servers. So if you put one up, it's likely going to get found, just like mine did. I was kind of surprised. So make certain that you're paying attention to that, because obviously you're going to rack up some cloud charges as well. So, pay attention to that when you start deploying these things for real. But here, you'll notice that it's jokemcp, all lowercase, just like we named it in our object. And here's my URL that I had up for a little while. Now, you can see back on the connector screen that I'm connected to a custom MCP server, right? jokemcp. So from here, if I'm in my LLM, in this case Claude, and I type in, can you tell me a joke? I get my joke back. And here we have it, right? It's, what do programmers prefer? Dark mode, because it's, light attracts bugs, just like we saw earlier. So what we were looking at, right? It's an MCP server. It's in TypeScript. Yes, we used Firebase functions. But, as you saw, we connected to it from an actual LLM. So everything was up and running. Just got to pay attention to the stateful versus stateless. But that's all there is to it. And I will have a link to the GitHub repository that has the code for this down in the comments. So make sure you go take a look at that. But until the next video, appreciate everybody watching. And if you're getting something out of this, as always, don't forget a like and a subscribe. Huge appreciation. But until the next video, let me know down in the comments what you think about this one and what you might like to see. But until next time, take care, everybody.